Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's not everything as futures market. So there's probably at one time a contract for it.
I'll move all this in a second.
So there's no.
No, I'm gonna move it in a second. I just have to do it for a second.
Thank you.
Yep. So what class is in here now? What department is that in?
It's all in plant home.
What time did your class start?
This is a makeup class.
Oh, okay. It normally doesn't.
No, it's usually on Wednesday, 1:30,
Oh, okay.
4:30.
So I'm not used to anybody coming in here.
Yeah. I was gonna have Carrie come in here and kick me out.
So I'm real authoritative.
Hey, that's fine. That's great. Like, what's your 50 minutes is just right, but it's about an hour and 45 minutes a day a week.
We're doing 3 hours.
That's crazy. Because like at like that 50-minute mark, that's when I can tell like just from everybody's expressions that they're kind of like, all right, I can't absorb anymore.
Right.
Try 3 hours.
Yeah, like, I remember taking some like classes like 3 hours. Yeah, obviously there's definitely breaks.
So you're doing futures markets?
Yeah.
I would want to be in futures right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's hard to explain too. It's challenging to teach because it's so abstract. It's like, all right, so you get these contracts that you kind of deliver on, but all of them get offset. Nothing, only less than 1% actually gets delivered on. So, yeah. It's the first time we've taught it. Yeah. It's a fun class. I mean, there's many sides to it.
Oh, this is only 2 hours.
Okay.
Only 2 hours. Hey, can we stop lighting this thing? We don't. It just.
Oh, yeah, we can turn it on. It kind of just matters if you hit the button or not.
Is it?
Yeah, it holds no value.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah.
There should be about that much wire.
I know.
So why did you do it that way?
I do. Why not?
Why did you set it up this way?
I didn't build these. Trust me. I would change the way these are built in a heartbeat.
We're just gonna say there's a color, third color. There's a class in here.
You guys are good to go. You got your lecture on a thunder on or anything?
Let's see if we get this. I do. I should.
Wow.
You can also review our plant pathology book if you'd like. Why isn't that going in there?
You can't get it this time. Cut you off. Takes 3 times to get it back in.
Okay, so what do we do here? Open fold files to view files. Can't do it. Bob book. What's your name? Yeah. Would you like chapter 28? How about week 3?
Yeah.
That's what you want, right?
Do it, yeah.
I'm going to suggest you have your homework due either this Friday or Monday. That way we'll get back on track. And I'll have my Wednesday due the following Friday. Yours is actually pretty
Straightforward.
Yeah, it's very,
Monday.
yeah. So how we do this? So we go here. Is it projecting? It is. And so we're zooming.
Yeah, yours. I don't know if Jamie and Rob's going to be on, but it's recording for them
Yeah,
either
cool.
way. So I'll send you guys the link to the
Very
lecture.
nice. Okay. Thanks, Carrie. Take a couple extra pens out of the.
Yeah, I'll still extra office pen to work out.
Yeah.
It evens out.
You don't give her food?
Pardon?
You don't give her food?
No,
Chocolate,
no.
anything else?
It's too skinny. Lower thirds. I have to watch those too. You gotta watch these thin ones.
I got,
What? Yeah, is it good?
beautiful.
Cool.
My spine is flat.
So fun. That's what that's what I said to your mother. I said, she has no spine. I've heard devil pussyfooting around feeding book camps.
Thank you.
I hope you get it. You deserve it.
Thank you. That would be.
No, rare winner. 7 years ago. That's why. So I have history.
Being successful.
Oh, yeah, it only comes around once in 4 years for you, and once every 4 years for her. So I think I got her the first one.
That's pretty
So,
cool.
yeah, I was like,
Yeah, I forgot to bring the name tag.
that's it. Oh, what I'm going to ask you to do is,
You
since
tomorrow.
we're combining these weeks, it's kind of running each other. I'm going to ask them by Monday, so that their topic sentences that would have something they've written that we can actually work on in their titles. Because tomorrow is titles and topic sentences and all that other good stuff.
Ready?
Yeah, they're fast.
And then the week after that is yours, right?
I think they're all mine for the next 3 weeks.
And then mine comes out. I got mine.
The 24th. Because I see I'm away on the 24th. I mean, join me.
Okay, so the 24th is mine.
Well, I'd have to look at the syllabus, but I'm going to say it. It can't be right.
Okay, because I
I think
have,
I scheduled it that way.
that's the graphic.
Yeah, or something. It's either that. Yeah, it's probably graphic.
I think it's graphic.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to get that lecture Saturday.
Oh, you've already done it? We're busy. Yeah, I did mine Saturday. There's been a homework. I know that things. I got to leave here at 1:30. I forgot how to use it.
So let me just take this down.
No, I'll come back up and get it. Shit on last night. I just leave it up. Just turn it on or something. Don't record. We'll finish recording.
Okay.
I'll
Sounds
just
good.
come up here. I forgot we had a Brazilian meeting. I
Okay.
did talk to him about China. I don't think he's there. I'll ask him. Yeah.
You told them all the.
I didn't tell him all the particulars. I just said it wasn't falling through. You want me to?
Yeah, just a minute.
It's kind of my view is kind of skewed. Yeah, I'm not impartial. I have a really strong connection. But I mean, I wasn't imagining things. I know it isn't. And they're willing to do it. But it's it's too late.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have my third user scholarship. I think I got Avon's daughters coming.
And they've done really?
Yeah. She's a PhD out of Connecticut.
Wow. That's
She needs some
pretty cool.
experience in the United States to come over and get off soil.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, anyways. And,
Are we
my Ghana
are we
person.
filming right now?
Pardon me?
Are we filming right now?
Yeah,
You're recording.
I think we're recording.
You're not recording.
Probably. Yeah, I forgot about that.
No,
It's kind of like a ball with the mic. Did you see the truck? Go, I don't know if it's that one.
we'll see what happens.
I voted for me.
All right. Thank you very much for having the dedication coming in and making up for the lost time. And it's really hard to believe we missed time because of ice and snow when you look out there and then you feel the temperature inside here. It always feels like it's so hot. But anyway, we are going to talk about grammar gremlins, misused words, and conciseness today. Now, most of you have got words that you mix up. Everybody's got something. I've got the that which problem that I have to think about every time. And for some reason, most people have one or two words that they tend to misspell. For me, it's exercise. I don't know why I want to put S-I-Z-E in there. It has nothing to do with well, maybe it does have a Freudian relationship to exercise. But for some reason, I always want to spell it that way. So, do any of you have any pet peeves or things that are difficult for you that you deal with, like two and two and there, or anything like that? The theirs drive you crazy? They drive a lot of people. Oh, good. I am so glad to hear that. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of, there's a few others that I have trouble with the I or the A, whether they're spelled right. And, spelling checker is nice sometimes. But you can't always trust it. And then grammar checker, a lot of times I'll find myself looking at grammar checker thinking, who wrote this program? Because they'd be so wrong. But what you have to do is, it's nice to use those tools just as an alert. but ultimately it's good to know what you're doing. And what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and address some of the most common mistakes we see. And don't think it's only students that do this. Okay? Invariably, I'll at least get 1 or 2 emails from faculty who should know better, and they'll have the twos messed up, or the theirs messed up, or even the it's messed up. So you're not the only ones that have that weakness. How many of you read electronic books? You find yourself editing as you go along, and you wonder, did they ever have English? Because in particular, the electronic books seem to have that weakness too. And I wonder if they've just never been edited. But you think that's what the problem is? Yeah, no one bothered to read them ahead of time. So, but we're going to try and fix some of that, okay? We're going to talk about grammar gremlins. And these are grammatical errors consisting of particularly confused words that are very common. And sometimes they are so common, they've almost become fixtures of speech. But it's a hallmark of being educated when you know better. And even though it's very common, you don't use them or you use them correctly. Okay? We want you to be so well educated that you know the difference. All right? Now, one of those is the word combination hopefully. Hopefully and I hope is 2 different word combinations, and hopefully means in a hopeful manner. Okay. Just like gratefully means in a grateful manner. And many people use hopefully when they actually mean I hope. Like, hopefully I will get an A in this class. When really you're saying in a hopeful manner I will get an A in this class? That doesn't make sense, does it? And what you really mean to say is I hope I will get an A in this class. When really the chances are I will study like crazy and ensure that I get an A in the class, right? Okay. Actually, pretty decent. Believe it or not, because we work your buns off. Every time you put in all that effort on homeworks and all the effort on proposals, you have a very good shot at getting an A in the class. And I like to make sure that you get your money's worth because you pay good money for this class, right? I never want you to walk out of a lecture here and think to yourself, I've been cheated. All right, if you ever feel like you've been cheated and you didn't get enough lecture, you didn't get enough information, you didn't get enough attention or rigor, we definitely want to know about that, okay? You're not feeling cheated already, are you? Okay, good. That's a good sign. Then there's also affect and effect. Okay, this one is abused so many times. And there's a really simple way of remembering it. Affect with an A is almost always a verb. Okay, it's an action. And if you think about it, acting on something, they both start with A. That helps you remember that affect with an A is the verb. Effect with an E is almost always a noun meaning the result of. And if you think of E being an end result, that helps you remember it much more easily. Now, are you ready for your test? Higher gas prices will have a bad what? Effect, right, with an E, right? That was pretty easy, right? And may even affect, with an A, the number of people traveling on vacations this year. Now see how easy it is when you understand the difference? Okay, you have when you start frowning, you get this little thing here. All right, but you're okay now, right? It just disappeared. All right, we want to make sure those don't stay. If it stays too long, you know what happens? You get these lines like this. Yeah, you don't want to have that. All right? All right, so you did very well on that one. Let's try fewer and less. You use the word fewer when you have anything that you can count. All right? Things like fewer blueberries or fewer coins. And you use less with things that cannot be counted. You can't say fewer love, fewer determination, right? All right, so the new pumpkin pies were popular because they had fewer calories and less crust than the previous ones. Very good, you guys are good. Picking it up fast. The The same way with many and much. Many means great in number or countable. Much means great in amount. Okay, it might be measurable, but it's great in amount. So the old pumpkin pie recipe had too much crust and too many calories per slice. Okay, see the difference there? And then there's amount versus number. You use amount for things that can be measured. You use number for things that can be counted. All right, for example, what would you say here? The number of calories and the amount of crust in the new pumpkin pies made them more popular than previous ones. I can tell already you guys are never going to make any mistakes, right? Now we've got the opposite side. We've got decrease and reduce. Decrease means to lessen in number, and reduce means to lessen in amount. So what would you say to this one? To improve the pumpkin pie, the food scientists decided to decrease the calories and lessen the crust. Very good. All right. Then we've got majority versus most. Majority applies to counts only. Okay. Like you'll be talking about most of the trees, plants, people, treatments. Most can be used for bulk items and for counts, both. All right, but majority has to apply to counts only, so it's more restrictive. Okay, so you can say the majority of the assimilated carbon went to young leaves and not to roots, and if you said that, it would be wrong, right? But if you said most of the assimilated carbon went to young leaves and not to roots, that would be correct. But if it was something that was countable, then that would be different. Okay? Now we've got more than versus over, and we see this all the time. You use more than or greater than when you want to indicate that one quantity is greater than the other. But in common usage, you'll hear people say, well, that was over the amount that was allocated to the control, when they're really talking about greater than. Okay? You want to reserve the use of over for a physical position. Like the bird flew over my head. The evidence is on my forehead. Okay? Over is a physical position. All right? Clouds passed over the solar collector. All right? And for a range of time, like over the past 35 years. That's correct. Now, the plant height in the fertilizer treatment was over that of the control is a wrong use of the word over. You would have to use greater than. The plant height in the fertilizer treatment was more than that of the control, that would be correct. So greater than or more than, those are correct. So over, you want to make sure you isolate that for a physical position or a time. Okay? Multiple is used as an adjective to describe the object mentioned, like a multiple choice test or a multiple fruit, but it's never used to quantify something. Okay? If you want to quantify it, you need to use the word several. For example, instead of saying multiple apple cultivars were evaluated in the experimental orchard, if you say that, what you're really trying to say is several apple cultivars were evaluated in the experimental orchard. If it was truly a multiple apple cultivar, it would be one tree with a whole bunch of cultivars grafted on top of it, right? So don't mistake the meaning of both of those. That is possible to do, exactly. But it's a pain in the neck. And a lot of times one cultivar will outgrow the others and it crowds out the others, so don't pay money for it. They always make you pay extra for it, it's not worth it. Or sometimes somebody let the rootstock grow out in the middle of the tree. Yeah. Now there's a difference between imply and infer. A speaker or writer implies something. They're transmitting the message. Okay? The listener is the one that infers the meaning of the message. All right? They're the receiver of the message. All right? So, how about this one? When he Does that imply or infer? Implied, very good. When he implied that the university budget was critically short, the faculty could infer that there would be no raises this year. Very good job. Yeah. But he's right.
Yeah.
He's right. He may be anal, but he's right.
I just happened to think that.
Okay. Actually, when you think of it, we have a lot in common with Sheldon, don't we? How many of you have said, I could care less what he does? Or I could care less what we do. I could care less what we eat. When you say, I could care less, it means you care so much. All right, you care so much that it's possible for you to care less than you already care already, which is huge. And what are you actually trying to say? You're trying to say, I couldn't care less. It means when you say, I couldn't care less, it means I care such a minuscule amount about this that there's no way physically that I could care any smaller than that amount. So next time you say it, get a little bit of class and say, I couldn't care less. All right? And you'll be amazed when you start using things the right way, it does catch on and it sticks. All right? So I couldn't care less if we eat at Zaxby's or Luigi's tonight, as long as I don't have to cook. Now, unique is one of those words that you're either unique or you're not unique. You really can't be very unique, rather unique. You're either unique or you're not. It's just like, okay, dead. All right? You're either dead or you're alive. I've heard people say, oh, he's very dead. All right. You're either dead or you're not. All right? I guess that applies to pregnant too, because I've seen people say, oh, she is very pregnant. But really, she's still pregnant, right? It's either pregnant or not. Okay, so the student trying to pay her fees with an expired credit card was in a unique position. All right, how about bad versus badly? Any of you have pangs about which one to use there? Badly is an adverb, and it has to modify the verb. If you're talking about doing something badly, all right, that's when you use the badly. That's when you use the adverb. Bad is an adjective, and it's got to modify the noun or pronoun. Okay? So how about this one? After John ate the leftovers, he felt bad, very good. And Mary's car needed oil, badly. So badly describes how much the car needed oil. And if you think about John, he was the one that felt bad, right? So there's an identity between John and bad, right? Very good. And then sometimes you'll see people using irregardless all the time. It's not standard English. You know, we have a tendency when we don't have direct guidance sometimes in earlier years, we make up a lot of words. And that's one of those words that sort of got made up and adopted and it sounded pretty good, so people keep using it. When you really should use just regardless. Irregardless makes you look silly because it's not standard English. Really? So, how do you use it? All of the HACCP cultures indicated bacterial contamination regardless of the food sterilization protocol used. That could describe that restaurant too, couldn't it? Now we've got the words option, alternative, and alternate. Option refers to a choice among three or more things. Okay. To treat this disease, we have three options. Alternative is a noun that refers to a choice between two things. To measure temperature, we have two alternatives. Alternate can be used as a noun to refer to a substitute. For example, he's the alternate for the committee. Or alternate as an adjective refers to something that it occurs in turns, like the zebra's coat has alternate stripes of white and black. Okay? Now, we also have insure versus insure. You ever write that and wonder if you should be writing I or E? If you're if you're writing about things like legal policies or insurance policies or things like life insurance, use the I form, insure. Use E for all the other senses, for example, to guarantee or to promote. Okay, so Sarah studied hard to E. Very good. I have a policy to beautiful. You guys are very, very good. Okay, now we've got two words, farther and further. You get confused with these? Farther is always used to express actual physical distance. And it's actually part of the word, FAR. You think about it as distance. Further is used when dealing with philosophical or ideological differences. So if you say the idea was worth what kind of study? Further, very good. Priscilla has farther to go to reach home. Very good. And then there's might and may. There's two common uses, all right? May is often the present tense and the past tense is might. Okay, for example, she says she may complete her homework today. Or she thought she might complete her homework today. Okay, that's past tense. It also has a subtle difference when you refer to how remote a possibility something is of occurring. For example, any university which publishes misleading information may be cited, and in extreme cases, might lose accreditation. Okay? So it helps give you the idea of what are the chances of something occurring. May, the chances are fairly likely. Might, much more remote. Okay? Now there's among and between. All right? Between is used between two choices. Among is used when there's more than two choices. See the difference here? Antonio had a difficult time deciding between the two restaurants. There's our between, but an even harder time deciding among his 4 girlfriends for tonight's entertainment. Antonio must be taking vitamins, that's all I gotta say. Either that or he's not taking tough courses. It's sort of like the irregardless. Yeah, just use among. Old English, right. But we've kind of moved on beyond that. So. Brethren, stuff like that, yeah. All right, now compare with versus compare to. Use compare with when you're comparing two things that belong in the same class or they're the same type of thing. For example, in his study, Barnhart compared drug treatments with radiation treatments. In this case, they're both treatments. Okay? Compare to is used when you're making an analogy, and the analogy is something that the two things that you're comparing are in completely different classes. For example, Freud compared the relationship of the ego and the id to a horse and its rider. Okay. Now we got while and whereas. Now some of these words are kind of confusing. The homework's going to help you straighten these out. Because the homework, what we do is try and use that to help reinforce. While more commonly means during the time or in an interval of time. Okay. Sometimes it's used the same way as whereas, but in scientific writing, you want to try and avoid confusion. So in scientific writing, we try to restrict its use to during the time. Okay. And whereas means in contrast to or on the contrary. For example, John worked on his proposal homework while he was on spring break, whereas Peter did not. See the difference between the two? And sometimes there are subtle differences between the words, but we try to make sure we're very careful about not being misleading. And then because versus since. Because means for the reason that. Since can also mean the same thing as because, but here's another one of those cases where it's better if you limit it to the meaning of from then till now to avoid confusion. All right? The scientific writing student had a very hard time completing his homework by the deadline since he had been playing video games nonstop since last week. You want to really say because he had been playing video games nonstop since last week. Okay. We know this is fictitious. Because no scientific writing student has time to play video games that much, right? Now this is another one that's subtle. There's a difference between due to and because of. Due to is a phrase that always modifies a noun. The example here is the failure was due to low temperature. And we're talking about failure, and the due to modifies that noun. That's why we're using due to, not because of. Because of is a phrase that's always used to modify a verb. All right? The steel failed because of the low temperature. In this case, failed was the verb. Okay? Now, how many of you get this one mixed up? All right. Yeah, you do sometimes. All right, if you think about principal being main or the person in charge, and one of the things they teach in high school is the principal, P-A-L, was a pal of mine. And if you think of P-A-L, being the principal, then you don't get the two mixed up. And the way I keep it straight, if I think about principal with an L-E, it means a rule or code that sounds legal to me, and legal starts with the L-E. That's how I remember the difference between the two. So you say the principal, P-A-L, reason that order was restored was that the principal, P-A-L, relied on age-old principles, L-E, of chaos management. So now this way you can keep them straight. And here's one of my favorites, it's and its. When an apostrophe goes in there, that means something is missing. Something was taken out. If you stick to something that was taken out back in there, you can never get confused, right? So its is a contraction of it is or it has. When you see that apostrophe, automatically say it is or it has in your mind, right? Its, ITS, is a personal pronoun and it's a possessive form of it. So you would say its, when we look at that apostrophe and say it is, too bad that its hard disk was fried when lightning struck yesterday. And that way you don't get the two mixed up. It's pretty straightforward. And that reminds me, can you use contractions in formal speech? If you're writing a cover letter for a job, would you use contractions? If you're writing an email to a friend, would you use contractions? If you wrote an email to me, would you use contractions? No. So I've been known to take points off. You might, but I think you've lost so many points. There's no hope yet, right? There is such a thing as Deanie points in my office. When people do particularly great things, I like to award Deanie points. But someone brought up at the staff meeting the other day, they said, what are they worth? Have they ever meant anything? And I have to now think about that because I've never given them anything for the Deanie points. So they should be worth something, right? Mm-hmm. Here's objective versus rationale. Objective is a goal or aim. A rationale is a reason or justification. Your objective for taking this class was to become a better writer, right? And the rationale for becoming a better writer is that defines professional success, correct? So the objective of the proposal was to develop high lysine corn, and his rationale was to provide better nutritional quality to those relying on it for subsistence. See the subtle difference between the two? Okay. And here's nauseated versus nauseous. All right. Nauseated means to feel sick to your stomach. I can stand on a dock and look at a boat bobbing in the water and feel nauseated. All right. Nauseous is the reason for being sick or causing one to become sick. There's a cartoon, I forget what the cartoon is out there, where the kid says, I'm nauseous, I'm nauseous. That means that something about him is making other people become nauseated. Not that he's nauseated himself. We were nauseated in the lab because of the nauseous fumes emanating from the putrescine sample. Yes. Mm-hmm. Neurological. Yeah. That's all. And if you say neurological and it's hanging there, it's supposed to modify something. I think you're right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. Exactly. I think you are correct. Okay. In fact, if I were you, I'd be very firm in it. Trust yourself. Well, there's a lot of smart people that are not smart in everything too, but it's okay. I would put money on you. All right, 2, 2, and 2. The 2 with the 2 O's is an adverb and it means also or very or excessively. TWO is an adjective and it means the number 2. And 2 with 1 O is a preposition indicating place, purpose, or time. For example, Lena worked 2 O's, too hard for those 2, meaning 2, long years of graduate school to ever give up. See the difference between them? Okay. Now here's our famous there, and there. There with an EIR is a possessive pronoun, meaning it belongs to them. There, THERE, means in that place. Right. There with apostrophe RE is a contraction of they are. When you see that apostrophe, what are you going to do? Plug in the word, right? So you know what's missing. That way, it'll be a little bit easier for you to keep track of what's missing and which one to use. There, apostrophe RE, hard at work, on their, the possessive form task of making chocolate confections over there in food science. All right? Then there's a subtle one, continuous versus continual. Continuous means without interruption. Continual means repeatedly. All right? So if you wanted to say the whale, what would you say? Continuously or continually? Who said continually? Very good. Continually dive to great depths. Searching for food. And the electromagnetic spectrum is continuous. Very good. Then we've got content versus concentration. Content is how much of something is contained in something else. It becomes a concentration when it's a content per unit mass or volume. That's the difference between the two. If I said the tissue content of sugars in the sample range from 15 to 20 grams, that says how much of that was in that, versus concentration of sugars in the sample range from 15 to 20 milligrams per the 100 grams. Okay, then it becomes a concentration. And then there's replicate, or some people say replicate, versus replication. Replication is always a noun and it means an exact copy. And this is what you do in science. You have replications, right? Or sometimes you call them reps. Replicate is always a verb and it means to reproduce something exactly. So when you use replicate as a word to replace replication, it's wrong. The third replicate responded differently than the others. That's wrong. Okay. If you said the third replication responded differently than the others, you're correct. Okay. And then we've got differential versus various. Differential is a kind of equation or part of a transmission, and sometimes it can refer to things like differential gene expression. Okay. Various means different kinds or categories. So when you say we tested differential rates of fertilizers, that's wrong. You could say we tested various rates of fertilizers, and that would be correct. Okay. Then there's visual versus visible. Visual refers to an action or reaction by the eyes, like visual acuity. How many of you have great visual acuity? Nope. Isn't it good we have glasses? Yes. All right. Visible refers to the property of being seen. So if we said the low rate of vitamin C in the diet induced visual symptoms, that's not correct unless blindness was one of those symptoms. Okay. If you said the low rate of vitamin C in the diet induced visible symptoms, that means the symptoms you were observing with your eyes were very easily seen. Okay. And now here's during and after. Okay. There's subtle differences between these two. During means throughout a particular period or event, and after means later in time or subsequent to. And here comes that quality of being very careful and very accurate about what you're saying. If you say lambs grew rapidly after 3 weeks of hand feeding when they were euthanized for evaluation, that means they grew after they were euthanized. What you meant to say is lambs grew rapidly during 3 weeks of hand feeding, after which they were euthanized for evaluation. See the difference between those? Okay. And here's, we have a lot of misuses of both. Okay. I used to have a graduate student that put both in everything, but when he read it, he would say both. It used to drive me crazy. I think he just liked the way it sounded. If you say both stems and leaves develop normally, that means you had at least 2 stems and at least 2 leaves, and they all develop normally. Okay. What you intended to say is stems and leaves develop normally. Simple and straightforward. You don't need to add the both. And here's both versus either. The percentage of Hispanics was higher than the percentage of both the Asians and the blacks. Does this mean higher than both added together? Kind of confusing, isn't it? When really, what you should have said, to make it absolutely clear, the percentage of Hispanics was higher than the percentage of either the Asians or the blacks. Now you know what's being said, right? And you don't want to cause confusion. Hey, and versus or. You wouldn't think that that would be confusing, would you? I mean, everybody knows what and or is, but it tends to get misused. And this is the way it gets misused. And means 2 or more items occurring together, and or is to link alternatives. Okay? When you say the medium contained glucose at 0, 10, 20, and 50 milligrams per liter, you say it contained all of those things, when you really meant to say 0, 10, 20, or 50 milligrams per liter. And you see this mistake all the time in the literature. Okay? If you said it this way, fever can be reduced by aspirin and Tylenol, although Tylenol is safer for young children. It kind of implies that both are given at the same time. And that could be an issue. When you really want to say fever can be reduced by aspirin or Tylenol, although Tylenol is safer for young children. Okay? See the difference between those? All right. Like is a preposition, and it introduces a prepositional phrase. Like Earth is a prepositional phrase. Okay? You notice what it's set off by? A comma. Because prepositional phrases are setting the stage, and if you don't put that comma in there, sometimes they can be confusing. If you have an introductory prepositional phrase, always put the comma, okay? Now, like Earth, the planet Mars has an elliptical orbit. As is used as a conjunction and introduces clauses. The airfield looks as it did in 1937 when the dirigible exploded. As it did in 1937 is a clause. Okay? So, the slogan down below is a slogan that was out, 50 years ago or a long time ago when they were still advertising cigarettes? And they would say, Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. What should that really be? As a cigarette should, right? All right. Now we've got a difference between connote and denote. All right? Connote means to imply or suggest something. Denote means to have a very specific meaning. So when we say the heart depicted in the poster connoted caring and generosity, all right? There's a difference between that and the heart depicted in the poster denoted the anatomy of a functioning cardiovascular system. See the difference between the two? Okay. And we also have approximately versus about. I bet you never realized there were so many ways to mess up, right? This is a good way to get that appreciation. Approximately is used when you're modifying a measurement's accuracy to within a fraction, and it's applied to continuous data. About is used to designate uncertainty about a number used for quantifying discontinuous data. Okay? So there were what? Approximately or about? About, very good. About 50 people in the faculty meeting. The radical had emerged to approximately 25 millimeters long. Excellent. Now, sometimes you see the word parameter used. Right? Technically, a parameter is only used legitimately in crystallography or mathematics. Right? In a plant or an experimental subject, they can have things like characteristics or attributes or features or qualities, but we can't legitimately talk about parameters. So the acclimatization characteristics measured were resistance to loss of fresh weight or stomatal closure, okay? Not parameters measured. And here's another one I sometimes see. Center around doesn't make any sense at all, does it? It should be either center on or revolve around. Then it makes sense, okay? And the word different means not the same. All the different treatments elicited a dwarfing response. If I said that, it implies different from something else. So am I saying, is it different from a standard, different from treatments used elsewhere? Is it different from treatments used earlier? So instead of using the word different, you should be using various. All the various treatments elicited a dwarfing response. That's beautifully concise. I like that very much. You get a Deanie point for that one. Save them up now. They may be valuable someday. All right. Panacea. Okay. A lot of people mean when they. Do we know what that was? Okay. Panacea means a cure-all, but it's often wrongly used as a synonym for cure. All right. Transitional courses may be a panacea for the lack of preparedness of entering freshmen. When really you mean to say transitional courses may be a cure for the lack of preparedness for entering freshmen. But don't use it casually unless you understand what you're trying to say. What about penultimate? Sometimes you see politicians use this word. They truck it out to look impressive. And penultimate is not ultimate in the nth degree, all right? But it really means it's next to the last. And yet sometimes I am the penultimate choice for people who want to have this whole country fixed, all right? Really, they mean, next to the last choice. I don't think they want to be using it in that same context. And here's Dr. Trigiano's favorite pair of words, that versus which, okay? That is used for restrictive clauses. If you left that clause out, it starts with the that, it'll change the meaning of the sentence. And because it's so essential to the meaning of the sentence, you don't set it off with commas, okay? When you set something off with commas, that means if you dropped it out, it wouldn't change the meaning of the sentence. Which is used for non-restrictive clauses. It's preceded by a comma, and it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence if left out. But here's the example. If you say, our house that has a red door and green shutters needs painting. Maybe you own a whole bunch of houses, but it's only the house that has the red door and green shutters that's the one that needs the painting. Okay? If you say, our house which has a red door and green shutters needs painting, you're saying our house which happens to have a red door and green shutters needs painting. See the difference between the two? One restricts the house choice to that one. The other one is just a little bit of added information about that house. Here's another one. Alkaloids which contain nitrogen are poisonous. Now it's not set off by a comma. So you're confused about what that means. Does it mean that alkaloids which happen to contain nitrogen are poisonous? Is all alkaloids are poisonous? Or alkaloids, only those that contain nitrogen are poisonous? And you can't tell from the way that sentence is written. This is why the difference sometimes between that and which is so particular, and so it needs to be so carefully noted. And then there's where. I'm looking for a position where I can apply, where I can apply the research experience I have gained to advance my career. Where usually refers to a geographic location, okay? Is a position a geographical location? Not really. So you should be saying things like in which. So I'm looking for a position in which I can apply the research experience I've gained to advance my career. Okay? But we tend to use where pretty casually. Now, in scientific writing, you don't want to use things that are vague. If ever you see the word vague on your writing, it probably comes from me, because that's one of my pet peeves, all right? If you think about every word you write costing you money, you want to make sure you get your money's worth, right? And when you say a number of, what does it mean? All right, does it mean a few, many, several? So it's too vague for use in scientific writing because it doesn't really say anything. It has very little value. The same way with the word adequate. Adequate's not very satisfying. The replicated test indicated that the fiber quality of the material was adequate. Adequate for who? Whose standard are we using? Something may be adequate for Dr. Trigiano, but it may not be adequate for me. Or it may be adequate for common usage, but maybe for special standards it wouldn't make it. So it doesn't mean anything. So adequate, get rid of that in your vocabulary too. And then you also need to use American spelling. How many of you grew up doing British spelling? I did too. So I still look at the word gray and I want to spell it G-R-E-Y. But we use, as a standard, we use Americanized spelling. So gray and recognize, we use the Z's instead of the S's. Okay, color rather than O-U-R, program rather than the M-M-E. Okay. Now, the word data. We know that common usage is allowing this to slip. Okay. But since you are most sophisticated in this class, and you know that data is plural, you're going to be using the plural case for this, right? Okay. So datum is singular, and rarely, if ever, do you talk about one piece of datum. Right? Here's some examples, though. The verb-subject agreement gets violated all the time. I had a boss one time that wrote me a note, and she didn't understand that Excel has tabs on the bottom, and she thought I sent her one table of data when I had sent 83. So she writes back and she says, one table is not enough, do your datas. She didn't stay my boss very long. The data collected by the undergraduate was very good, should be were. Okay. The data on breeding efficiency were incomplete, that's correct. So whenever you see the word data, just automatically, mentally check the verb, okay? And how much do you trust grammar checkers? No. That's pretty funny. That is pretty funny. And I will admit, sometimes we have kind of hard and fast rules because we want you to know the right way. But that doesn't mean the world is not looser, okay? All right. Another odd word is species. It's spelled the same way, whether it's singular or plural. And sometimes we do have strange plurals sometimes. For example, datum, the plural is data. Criterion, criteria is the plural. Phenomenon, phenomena is plural. Stratum, strata is the plural. But there is a tendency now just to begin starting to put an S on some of the words instead of using the A form. Focus versus foci, nucleus versus nuclei, appendix versus appendices, thesis versus theses. Now, here's a poem I kind of like because it tells you just how ridiculous English is. If English is not your first language, bless your heart. Because, sometimes we have the craziest language in the world. We begin with one box, the plural is boxes, yet the plural of ox is oxen, not oxes. One goose is a goose and two are called geese, but the plural of mouse is never meese. You may find a lone mouse or a whole set of mice, but the plural of house is houses, not heis. One speaks of a foot and two are called feet. One boot is a boot. Should a pair be called a beat? If one tooth is a tooth and a whole set are teeth, shouldn't the plural of booth be beef? If the singular is this and the plural of these, should the plural of kiss not be keys? We speak of a brother and also of brethren, yet though we say mother, we never say mother. The masculine pronouns are he, his, and him, but imagine the feminine she, shiz, and shim. So, we do have some crazy language. And then we also have abbreviations that can be confusing. And typically they come from the Latin. For example, e.g. is exempli gratia. For example, etc. comes from etc. meaning and so forth. Et al. This is one that is commonly messed up. Et means and. Does it have a period after it? No, because that's the whole word. Al is short for alia, which means others. That does have a period because it's a shortened form of alia. Okay? And so you have different examples of things that were taken from other languages. We abbreviate them and we have specific meanings for them. But make sure you put the periods where they're supposed to be. Okay. Now, conciseness is also important. There was a quote, think a volume, write a page, and for every page of thine, publish but a single line. Now, I like to think a lot about almost every career that you go into nowadays, you have to be able to communicate and write. If you think a whole volume and you only write a page, but you only publish a single line, are you going to be in trouble? You've got to be publishing all the time, right? Okay. So you have to be more productive. How many of you have a fear of writing? It's pretty rough getting exposed to the whole world, isn't it? But you have to get over it, okay? You have done the smartest thing in the world by signing up for this class because it's going to give you a whole set of confidence about your writing that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And that's going to pay off with your ability to turn out writing and get your work published. And you may not go through those horrible rejections that, did you go through some bad rejections? I did too. I worked really hard on my PhD work. When I went to publish it, I had a discussion that had to be at least 14 pages long. And I thought it was brilliant. I took a look at every single nuance of the work and discussed it so brilliantly that I figured, everybody would be so impressed with how thoroughly I thought it out. And when I got rejected the first time, I thought, how can they possibly fail to recognize the brilliance of this writing? They said, wordy. So I cut it down by half and submitted it again. And I thought, surely by now, it's very tight and concise. They're going to recognize now the brilliance of the work, right? Well, this time they used a few more words to reject it. But in a sense, it was the same thing. So don't make a discussion out of a molehill, I think was one of the comments. Right. All right, I didn't commit suicide. I am still here today. I rewrote that thing so many times until my major professor said, I give up. Now, he had a slight tendency also to write too much. Right. So I thought, I'm going to try it one more time. I shortened it. I shortened the discussion to 1/10 of the original size. I stuck with the main points, and I had a good take-home message. I submitted it. You know it got accepted that way? They didn't want all that brilliance. They just wanted the bottom line. And I was almost disappointed to get the acceptance. I thought, just think of all the great thoughts they were missing. And I didn't get to expose them to. But it got accepted. So you do a fine balance between conciseness and making sure you get the meaning in for what you want. Now, you have to be careful about violating conciseness in a lot of different ways. Sometimes people use affectations, like, I did indeed analyze the data. Or they might use stale expressions and incorporate those, like, this is old hat. Or vogue words. Vogue words like, I am like so ready, or awesome, or legalese. Legalese is when you use a very big long word when a short one will do, like whereas, or elucidate, or afforded, or terminated. They terminated the experiment. Sounds so much more impressive than I ended the experiment. Or cliches. It's mission critical we circle the wagon and seize the low-hanging fruit. All right, we have a chancellor that uses cliches all the time. Like, that dog won't hunt, or let's jump over the fence and look at the other side, and all these other things. I've got a collection of his. I'm up to about 40 now. And slang is never, never, never acceptable. So here's some violations of conciseness. Things like jargon. Jargon is language that's very, very specific to an individual field. When you're in doubt whether it's jargon or it's just specific to that field and it's common usage for everybody in that field, check your journal. Okay. But handling a plant too much could have seismomorphogenic effects. Of course, everybody knows what seismomorphogenic means, right? No? Maybe not unless you're in plant molecular or mechanical stress. Or the DNA was PCR'd for its ITS region. Everybody knows what that is, right? Oh, it must be jargon then. Or how about obfuscation? I love that word, obfuscation. This is what, politicians do. They don't want people to understand what they're actually saying. This is all about cost effectiveness. We can reframe the way we define it so that it's not viewed as simply foregrounding cost savings, but instead a much more complex interplay of influences and drivers that facilitate opportunities for enhancing the ways in which we manage movement. If I spoke like that in a faculty meeting, they would just shake their heads. Or only when I'm spoofing them. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't realize it right away, which is not a good thing. In measuring learning outcomes, it behooves us to empower holistic dialogue to extend mastery-focused models that lend themselves to quantitative measurement in alignment with real-life professional skills acquisition. What's that mean? Hard to tell, right? And what is the real-life professional skills acquisition? What is that? You had that term. What are those? What's that construct called? What is that called? Remember the railroad nouns? Boxcars? Real-life professional skills acquisition is boxcars. Okay? And you don't want to do that either. Now, here's the fog index, and you're going to do an exercise on the fog index with your homework. The fog index was developed by a guy named Robert Gunning in 1952. And he was trying to get some way to describe how complicated writing is, and it's roughly analogous to a certain reading level. So if you had a Gunning index of, let's say, 8, you're aiming for the 8th grade level. Okay? And it can be calculated with that formula, where N sub WS is the number of words in a paragraph divided by the number of sentences. And P sub LW is the percentage of long words. These are words having more than 3 syllables, with the exception of proper names. First words of sentences, compound words like bookkeeper, and verbs where the last syllable is ED or ES. Okay? Now, there is a Gunning index online. If you put in Gunning index, there's an analysis algorithm that's written, so it can automatically tell you how complex your writing is. Right? And so for your homework, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to pollute your writing. Part B of your homework is you're going to write about your research in a paragraph of about 250 words that clearly violates the principles of conciseness and is very obfuscated. You're going to have to intentionally write horribly. All right? And then below that paragraph, I want you to write a more concise and clear version. And then subject each paragraph to the Gunning Fog Index analysis and report the results. You will be amazed at the difference between the two. All right? The one down below is probably your more natural writing style, unless you've already been polluted by reading too many journal articles, in which case you may be getting already kind of obfuscated. But this is sort of a surprising thing. You'll be surprised by what you see. Now, conciseness also means choosing simpler words. If there's a longer word and a shorter word, tend to use the shorter word, like commence. We're going to commence this assignment. Sounds impressive, right? When begin is simpler, but you don't lose so many people over it. Or finalize versus finish, or prioritize versus rank, terminate versus end, or utilize. I see a lot of policy documents where they utilize something. Why don't they just use it? Much simpler. All right? And here's some common phrases. People say green in color. Well, what other way can you be green? You know, or for a period of 4 days. What's wrong with just 4 days? Or in length versus long. He showed weight gain. What about he just gained weight? Or a large number of versus many. Over a 4-month period versus just over 4 months. In the case of X, instead of saying just for X, or prior to versus before. Now, there's also conciseness violations when making comparisons. Right? You can say larger than versus larger as compared to. Or fruits were smaller instead of fruit size was smaller. How about this one? X was smaller than Y. It's simple and straightforward, right? Versus the size of X was reduced compared to the size of Y. And then yields were similar versus yield differences were not observed. And see how more concise is actually simpler to understand, right? Okay. A lot of times you can get more concise just by using the verb instead of the noun. For example, instead of saying make an adjustment, just say adjust. Same would make a judgment, just say judge, or make an assumption, assume. Or how about take into consideration? What about just consider? Make a referral, refer. Perform an investigation, this is just investigate. There are a lot of ways you can violate conciseness, but invariably the shorter and simplest way is the more understandable. And sometimes you can use a single word instead of a whole word phrase. It's like, at the present time means now. Or due to the fact that just means because, not since, as you know very carefully now. Or in the near future, you'll be taking your midterm, versus soon you'll be taking your midterm. Or on a regular basis, regularly, would seem to suggest, what about just suggest? See how easy it is to start thinking concise now. And you're probably going to have a hard time, now that we've talked about conciseness, you're probably going to have a hard time with your homework making it not concise. Because it's going to be harder and harder for you to intentionally violate the principles that you're absorbing now. And here's a bunch of words that you see, or word phrases that you see a lot. And these are things that turn up in publications over and over again. For example, we say considerable amount of versus much. Or let's see, have the appearance of versus just appeared or looked like. It has been reportedly found by Smith versus just Smith reported. I like the considerable number of. This means the same thing as many. But now that you've been sensitized to these phrases, you're going to see these over and over again in writing. And you're going to wish you had been the editor so you could have fixed them. And we will be doing some group editing. So are you ready for a conciseness test? All right, let's start at the back. You ready for this? All right, one of the problems, or one problem, just real simple, okay? In spite of the fact, what'd you say? In spite of, right? Yeah. Two separate occasions. What would you say? On two occasions, right? Or twice? That's even easier. In close agreement with? Very good. Take into consideration. Very good. All right, how about carry out experiments? Experiment, right? Very good. It's obvious that, obviously, yeah. The majority of, most, in the vicinity of. Oh, very good. Now you guys are getting good. On no occasion. Oh, brilliant. Okay. Ooh. Okay, I did spell that right. Now, sometimes you can be too concise, so be really careful about hitting the right amount of information. Okay? As you start paring away information, make sure you don't eliminate something that's essential. And here's a good example. Supplementing poultry feed with higher protein increased weight gain by 12.2%. Does it tell everything? When you take a look at that, you can have a whole lot of questions that come up. For example, how much protein and what source? Or when did the supplementation occur? What were the feeding conditions? Was this weight gain of what? Was it weight gain of the whole body? Was it weight gain of the meat? Were these chicks, laying hens, broiler hens? How long was the supplemented feed provided? And how long did it take to get the response? Mm-hmm. You could, and you might have additional sentences. Right now, though, that's a bare bones sentence. Okay? And you can see how you could have put more information in that sentence to answer some of those questions, right? Without having to resort to additional sentences. Yep. Now, our favorite friend, the definite and indefinite articles. If you're from India, you may have trouble with this, okay? And in scientific writing, sometimes we can eliminate the articles because they're unnecessary. But generally, if you have plural subjects, you can omit the article at the beginning of a sentence. Instead of saying the plants were grown, you can just say plants were grown, okay? If it's singular, you may have to use the article. Okay? Now, there's a difference between the and a. Right? One is definite and one is indefinite. Okay? If I said, I need an answer from somebody, am I talking about a specific answer? Just talk about any answer, right? I need a response. Right? But if I said, I need the response, I'm talking about a very specific response to a question, right? So is not definite, it's not restricted, it's generalized. The is very restricted, okay? Now, sometimes you'll see reflexive pronouns abused. They cannot be used as the subject or the object of a preposition. Dr. Sharma and myself will visit the laboratory this afternoon. That's so wrong. That's used as the subject of the sentence, and you can't do that. Instead, you should be saying, Dr. Sharma and I will visit the laboratory this afternoon. We have two professors in the College of Agriculture that tend to abuse this all the time. Okay? And every time they do that, I want to write a little anonymous note, but I can't figure out how to do that without them knowing who wrote it. The thought occurred to Eric and myself simultaneously. That's wrong. It's the object of a preposition. You should be saying, the thought occurred to Eric and me simultaneously. And another thing I've noticed people say, to Eric and I simultaneously. It should be me. Me is okay to use in the right place. Okay? Now, how you should be using those reflexive pronouns are for emphasis. For example, As for grading the exam, I will do it myself. It's being used for emphasis. Or I never accustom myself to long nights in the microbiology lab. So it's either used for emphasis or to turn the action back on the subject. Okay? Those are the only two ways you should be using them. Exactly. Exactly. Now, don't be guilty of writing zero. Writing a zero is when you have something that means nothing and it doesn't add anything to the sentence. For example, you might write the fact that. Most of the time you can scratch that out and it doesn't change the sentence at all. Or the presence of, or the course of. My favorite one is needless to say. If it's needless to say plants are green, why are you saying it? Right? If you imagine yourself paying money for that, is it worth it? No. Or as already stated. If you already stated it once, why are you stating it again? And the only reason you could be stating it again is because your readers are so stupid they didn't get it the first time? So are you saying your readers are stupid? Or it has long been known that. What does that really mean? If you say it has long been known that means I never bothered to look up the original reference. And I'm doing this magical hand waving saying, everybody knows this, right? Or let's say typical results are shown. Do they ever show typical results? Or they go through, they pick out their best results. Typically they pick out their best ones. Or it goes without saying. There's another one. Why are you saying it then? Okay? These are things called writing zeros. And then there's redundancy. Redundancy is the opposite of conciseness. Okay? Things like already existing. Can you be existing without already existing? Or let's see, at the present time, if you say at present, that's talking about time already, right? And basic fundamentals, are there any other kind of fundamentals besides basic fundamentals? Can you really completely eliminate anything? I always question that one. You know, anytime you have absolutes, I worry about absolutes. This comes up when you're arguing with somebody. Like, you never do this. Well, as soon as you say it, you can think of one or two times when they actually did it. Right? The one that bugs me all the time is at home when they say, you're always right. No, I can remember one time in 2013 when I was wrong. All right. For empty, introduce means anew, never before, none at all, still persist. Well, if it's persisting, it's still persisting. Okay? Do you see how those violate redundancy, or how they violate conciseness with redundancy? Now, this is a tongue-in-cheek example. This is a little bit by what people actually mean when they're writing things like this. A definite trend is an evidence. That means that the data are practically meaningless. You couldn't get any kind of significance, so you're calling it a trend. Or if they say typical results are shown, typically we find the prettiest data and represent that one. That's the graph that's being shown. In my experience, typically means once. In case after case might mean it happened twice. In a series of cases means it happened maybe 3 times. Or it is believed that. Who's the it that believes it? It means I think. Or it is generally believed that. It means I think it, and maybe 1 or 2 other people think it too. Or how about this one? A statistically oriented projection of the significance of these findings. It means this is a crazy guess, a wild guess. All right? So avoid these phrases because we know what they mean now. All right? Now, let's talk a little bit about the homework. Because the best way to get the word pairs straight is to actually have to use them. We have an interesting assignment for you. You're going to use each of the following pairs, or in a few cases, we've got trios of words correctly. You're going to use them in one sentence. All right? Not all 40 words in one sentence, but every pair or trio of words in the sentence. And it's got to be clearly showing the difference between how you use those words, but I want it in the context of science. Okay? Don't forget that you're writing about science. So, for example, I hope versus hopefully, you would use both those words correctly in the sentence, right? And it has to refer to science. So you have a whole series of pairs of words that you need to be able to use correctly, okay? And then part B was all about the gunning fog index. And we're going to see what your gunning fog index looks like when you write concisely versus when you intentionally write full of a mess, okay? It'll be really interesting to see how badly you can mess up your writing. All right? All right, so any questions on the homework? All right, this homework, because we're trying to catch up, this homework will be due Monday. This one is actually kind of fun to do. It's not painful like some of the other homeworks. All right, so if you can, let's make this one due Monday, and then we'll be catching up, okay? So any questions so far? Your sponges feel a little bit full. Right. I promise you doing the homework helps reinforce the words. Now, one small thing about the midterm. How many of you like to study at the last minute? How many of you wait and do all of your studying at the last minute? Do you like stress? So it's just one of the ways you, okay. They say if you expose yourself to the stuff you're trying to remember, okay, 3 days in a row, okay, by the third day it sticks much better. And it doesn't even have to be that intense an exposure. And then instead of studying all night before the exam, if you actually sleep the night before the exam, believe it or not, that helps a tremendous amount, being able to remember things the next morning. Okay. And you all know about the body language thing about learning, right? Thinking. Have you heard Amy Cuddy's talk on TED Talks? This is a woman who said your body language affects how fast you think. Okay? And if you take 2 minutes and you assume a body language position that's very confident, like do the victory symbol or you do the Captain America thing for 2 minutes, okay? Then what it does is all those stress hormones get reduced. And the feel good, feel confident hormones go up. And you actually think faster and you think better. But the minimum time you have to hold the position and be thinking those strong positive thoughts is 2 minutes. Okay? It does work. It honestly does. You tried it?
Yeah, you told me.
And how did it go? They wondered what you were doing? But you did outstanding, didn't you? And you got it? Yes. All right, fantastic. Yes. All right, now you can do the victory again, right? Yes. And it makes a difference. It honestly makes a difference. Okay? So, do all the things you're supposed to do for studying right. Don't get nervous. And remember, our midterm is only worth 20% of your grade. All right? The final exam is not comprehensive through the whole course. It concentrates mostly on that second half. All right? Because I used to hate instructors that would do that to us. And I decided when I taught, I'd never do that to you. Okay? All right. Thank you very much for coming in today. I really appreciate you very much. And we'll see you tomorrow. I wish this room were a little cooler. Okay. Did that answer the questions about the articles? Definite, indefinite articles? A little bit? Good. Good, good. right? It's not necessary. Always ask yourself, is this word worth $10? And if it's not, don't bother to use it. Okay, now it's different from transition words. Transition words help you lead the reader. Those are worth the $10. Okay? Very good.